What is up, everybody? Today we are going to talk about Novo Nordisk, ticker symbol NVO. They just released their earnings last week, so we're going to dive into that report. If you don't know, Novo Nordisk is a absolutely massive pharmaceutical company. They used to be the largest company in all of Europe by market cap. I'm sure you've heard of their products Ozempic and Wegovy. And I say they used to be the largest company in Europe because now they're not even in the top 5. The stock has dropped off massively over the past year. Today, it's down roughly 65% from its peak. So it's had quite the fall just in the past month. The company cut their guidance for 2025 at the end of July, and the market was not happy. Stock dropped another 20% that day alone. And when this earnings report came out last week, at least it seems most of the bad news was priced in. So there was a slight bounce here. Also, last week, Eli Lilly, who is by far their main competitor in this diabetes, obesity, weight loss space, they had some bad news about one of the drugs that's in their pipeline. And as a consequence, that had a positive effect on NOVO stock. But we're going to take a look at their quarter today. We're going to take a look at what we can expect going forward for this company and decide, is there an opportunity today now that the stock is down so much? Or maybe we should stay away. Maybe we should wait on this company. As always, if you get value out of the video, subscribe to the channel. We just passed 1,800 subscribers here on the channel. So thank you so much to everyone who has followed. Now, let's jump into Novo Nordisk. Now, as you see from this chart I have of their fundamentals, just looking at their top line revenue, it looks like they were a slow grower and then the stock just took off. This huge growth here, it has been fueled pretty much entirely by GLP-1s, by Ozempic, by Wegovy. And before this, before their main business was GLP-1s, Novo Nordisk, they've always been into diabetes care. Their main business was manufacturing and selling insulin. Up until the last decade, the majority of their revenue was coming from insulin. Nowadays, it's a totally different story. The majority of this company's revenue is coming from GLP-1s. And also, this GLP-1 segment, it's a higher margin segment. So it's pushed their margins up a bit over time. We see that, a decade ago or a little more, this company was a little bit below 40% operating margin. And nowadays, it's pretty consistently been right around 42 to 44% on operating margins. They have made an absolutely massive amount of money on Ozempic and similar drugs. The question is, what's the future going to be like? Is this growth going to continue? Is it going to stagnate? Why is the stock down right now? Well, first, to just really understand where the revenue for this company is coming from, I think this is a pretty good graphic here. We see the majority of the revenue is from the US, a little bit less from international. And the vast majority of this revenue, especially in the US, is from GLP-1s. This red right here, that's GLP-1s that are prescribed for diabetes. So this is Ozempic, and the blue is obesity care, which it's essentially the same drug, but not specifically for diabetes. And the main reason that the majority of sales here are in the US, it's not the volume of sales, it's pricing. In the US, you're paying, $1,000 a month or even more for a lot of these drugs. And in Europe or the rest of the world, Japan, you're maybe looking to pay $100 to $300 a month for a similar drug. There's a lot of reasons why drugs are more expensive in the US, and I don't want to get into all of them here. It would make for a way longer video. But just know, if you're buying into Novo Nordisk, one of the things that you are betting on is that extreme US pricing, like $1,000 a month for drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, you're betting that that's likely to continue for the foreseeable future. I think that is probably the case, but there's a few risks that we should talk about here. First, because Novo Nordisk struggled to keep up with demand for Ozempic and Wegovy, the FDA declared a shortage of these drugs in 2022. And that opened the door to other pharmacies to basically make knockoffs of these drugs legally. It's called compounding, and for the past few years, we've seen large pharmacies like Empower Pharmacy make compounded versions of Ozempic, and you've had telehealth platforms like Hims and Hers and Noom that are partnering with these compounding facilities and selling drugs which are essentially Ozempic and Wegovy at much lower prices. In many cases, we're talking, about $200-ish a month for a compounded version versus $1,000 a month for the brand name thing. Now, in the beginning of this year, the FDA declared that the shortage is over, and Novo Nordisk has threatened to defend their patents in court against a lot of these offenders. But this is very profitable, and there's still some providers that are trying to slip through the cracks by saying, we're personalizing the drugs, we're maybe adding like vitamin B12 to to the GLP-1. So it's personalized, and thus it qualifies for a loophole that exempts it from Novo Nordisk's patent. We've already seen this have a bit of an effect because Novo Nordisk slashed the cash price of Wegovy to about $500 a month. And the main reason for that is to counter competition from these cheaper compounded alternatives. Another potential risk that would be a massive negative for a company like Novo Nordisk is Trump has recently proposed an executive order that would align US prices on stuff like Ozempic, these GLP-1 drugs, with similar OECD countries. And if something like this actually happened, that would slash the price of these drugs in the US by an absolutely massive amount. I'm no expert on politics or policy, but it's definitely something we have to keep in mind when the vast majority of this growth in Novo Nordisk sales have been from basically one type of drug, GLP-1s. Their international insulin market, which is the next biggest area of sales after GLP-1s and obesity, it's actually been declining. And yes, they talk about growth in rare disease drugs, and they've had growth in the US insulin market, but these segments are very, very small compared to, Wegovy and Ozempic. Finally, something to think about with any pharma company is what is going on with the patents. And for Novo Nordisk, for their big blockbuster drugs, you're looking at patents expiring in the early 2030s. So, like 6 to 8-ish years from now. That might seem like a long time to some. It really doesn't to me, to be honest. When patents expire, it doesn't mean they're not going to make money anymore from these drugs, but it's very likely the case that you're going to have biosimilars, you're going to have generic versions of these drugs, and the margins are going to drop a lot for the brand name originals. Now, getting to their outlook for this year, getting to this quarter and their updated guidance, this is a lot of the reason why the stock has been down. They updated their guidance from 13 to 21% growth on the top line at constant exchange rate to now 8 to 14%. They also massively cut their free cash flow outlook to about $5.5 to $7 billion US here. Keep in mind that this is about a $170 billion company today. So, while it's not some astronomical multiple, if you look at the company on a multiple of its projected free cash flow for the year, it's not trading at some absurdly cheap valuation. I mean, that's about, 25-ish times their guidance for free cash flow for the year. And actually, and this is something I feel like a lot of people haven't talked about with Novo Nordisk, the numbers here don't mean that, they think that quarter 3 and quarter 4 of this year are going to grow sales at 8 to 14% year over year. These are numbers for the full fiscal year. So when you take into account the fact that quarter 1 and quarter 2, they grew sales year over year, and I'm looking in local currency, Danish krone here, they grew sales at 17.6% and about 11% year over year. So call this for the first quarter, they grew sales at roughly 14% year over year. What does their guidance imply about where they think sales growth will be for the second half of the year? Keep in mind, this top line is sales growth at a constant exchange rate. The reported sales growth, they say about 3 percentage points lower. So they think reported sales growth in Danish krone is going to be, 5 to 11% for the full year if we're just taking their numbers at face value. And they grew 14% in the first half of the year. So if the full year is going to be 5 to 11, what does that say about sales growth for the second half of the year? If I just take the midpoint of their reported sales growth of, 8-ish%, then they're guiding for the reported sales growth in the second half of the year to be, maybe only about 2 to 3% to get them to a full year number of 8%. They're looking for sales growth to be basically just above flat. Another way of looking at this, just look at free cash flow. They're guiding to 35 to 45 billion Danish krone for the year. What have they already done in the first 2 quarters? First 2 quarters, they've had 26 billion and 11 billion, so 37 billion of free cash flow in the first 2 quarters. If the full year is going to be between 35 and 45 billion, they're not really guiding for much in the second half of 2025. I think this is a lot of the reason why the stock has fallen off. They're not painting a pretty picture here. Now, to be fair, they basically ousted their last CEO. There's a new guy in charge, Maziar Dusar, if that's how you pronounce his name. He literally just took over. And, often when a new CEO comes in, they will sometimes sandbag the guidance or give really poor numbers, and the stock will tank a little bit, but it will make their tenure look a little bit better. If that's what's going on here with the guidance, it certainly would not be the first time that I've seen this. Now, let's go back to our sheet and see what we might be able to expect for a return on our investment in Novo Nordisk stock today. There are a lot of tailwinds around these obesity drugs. I think it's very likely that the world will probably only become a more obese place in the future. It's estimated that more than 55% of the US is going to be obese by 2035. Even countries like Spain, Germany, France, I mean, you're looking at 35% projected obesity in the next 10 years. I think it's pretty hard for me to argue with this forecast. And, because of that, I think this obesity market does have a very bright future. The question is, what is Novo Nordisk's profit going to be of this market? They have to keep a consistent pipeline of drugs. They have patents that are going to be rolling off in the early 2030s. There's risks around pricing in the US. I mean, if they can't keep massive price, like, $1,000 a month for some of these brand name drugs, then yeah, this revenue growth is not going to be the same over the next 5 years that it's been over the past. And because of a lot of these concerns and the fact that pharmaceutical companies have to keep investing in R&D, it's very expensive to bring a new drug to market. A lot of them aren't successful. Because of this, pharmaceutical companies typically don't trade for hugely expensive multiples. I mean, we've seen recently companies like Eli Lilly and, until the past year, Novo Nordisk trade for quite eye-popping multiples for a pharmaceutical company. Even today, after this massive drop in stock price, I mean, Novo Nordisk looks like there could be value here, but it doesn't look dirt cheap to me. Novo Nordisk is not as cheap as Elevance. It's not as cheap as a lot of these health insurance companies. When I'm looking at the healthcare space, I just think it's going to be a lot easier to make a bet on health insurance than to make a bet on a pharmaceutical company like Novo Nordisk. Putting some numbers into our sheet, if I assume 5% growth on the top line, which this might look absurdly low to some people when you see what the company has done in the past 5 years, but I'm basically looking at what their guidance is really implying for the second half of this year, and I'm projecting that forward. Again, they might be sandbagging the numbers, and maybe the next few years are going to look better than the second half of this year, but if I take that 5% growth on the top line, and I assume that they keep their margins where they are, and I give them, a 12 times multiple, which I think is fair for a pharmaceutical company. If this scenario comes true, you're looking at a 13% annualized return on Novo Nordisk today. That's pretty good. It would likely be a market-beating return. And in the bull case where you have double-digit top-line growth, and I'm giving them a 16 times multiple, even if I give them an 18, which would be basically the top of this pre-GLP-1 craze range, then you're looking at 30% annualized on Novo stock today. This would, of course, be an incredible investment over 5 years. But I'm also thinking about what is the bear case. And this is where it's kind of hard for me to predict. Most of the sales growth has been from one drug, GLP-1s, semaglutide. What happens when the patent on this expires? What happens if there's something that changes in pricing in the US? If the US actually adopts a kind of most favored nation policy with other OECD countries, that would be a huge hit to Novo's business. The fact is, I don't feel like I can confidently put in numbers in this bear case and say, I really don't think it's going to be worse than this. I don't know what those numbers would be. So for that reason, even though Novo Nordisk stock looks like value today, even though it's dropped a ton, I'd rather just play the healthcare space by buying health insurance companies. Right now, Novo is going to be a pass for me. I might miss out. I'm okay with that. There are always going to be thousands of stocks that go up in price that you didn't buy. That will always be a certainty in the market. I'm okay if I miss the boat on this one. And who knows? I mean, if the price drops a lot more, maybe I would decide to take a bet here to make it a small size in my portfolio. But for right now, I'm doing nothing with Novo stock. And if you got value out of the video, subscribe to the channel. If you agree or disagree with anything I said here, leave that down in the comments. And if you own Novo Nordisk stock or you're looking to buy it, what are you doing today? And as always, I hope to see you all in another video.